Hi guys. So this week's portion was so rich that it was hard to decide what really perplexed me the most and what I should dive into. In the end, the winner was the story of the Israelites complaining about the meat. This story is weird for a lot of reasons. First of all, why is it so bad? In the past, Israel complained for food when they were hungry and Hashem brought them food. Is it so wacky to ask for a little bit more protein? The manna, we're told by the Torah, tastes like honey cakes. You know, imagine having a tabernacle that's now built and running. There's sacrifices going all day long and they smell barbecue from morning until night. And it's like living in a steak restaurant and they have these honey cakes. Not so bad, but it's not so great either. Is it so terrible for them to say, hey, can I have a side of chicken? And it's even weirder considering that the last time they asked for meat, it wasn't so bad at all. In Shemot, Exodus chapter 16, it says very clearly that in verse 2, the entire community of Israel complained against Moses and against Aaron in the desert. And they said, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat and ate bread to our fill. I mean, they say, why didn't we just die already? We're so hungry and we left at least in Egypt we had food. And what does Hashem say? Does Hashem strike them down? No, it says in verse 11, the Lord spoke to Moses saying, I've heard the complaints of the children of Israel. Speak to them saying, in the afternoon you shall eat meat, and in the morning you shall be sated with bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. And it came to pass in the evening that the quails went up and covered the camp. And in the morning there was a layer of dew around the camp, and the layer of dew went up. And behold, on the surface of the desert, a fine bare substance, as fine as frost on the ground. And meaning Hashem's original dietary plan included both quail meat and manna. It seems that over time, the quail was scaled back and they were just left with manna. So is it so bad that they're like, oh, Hashem, remember the quail? That was really nice. Hashem was fine giving them quail last time. Why is Hashem's response so different here? Why is Hashem so upset? And besides, for Hashem's different response, look at Moshe's different response. He seems to have a complete, excuse me, I'm sorry for saying this, but a meltdown. He was certainly consternated and upset in the past with the complaining, but here Moshe actually gets so upset that he asks God to kill him. He says, what are these, my children? Did I carry them in my womb? Did I give birth to them? That I need to have this miserable responsibility? Why is this particular thing making Moshe so upset? He didn't even seem to be this upset at much worse sins, both in the past and in the future. And then there's Hashem's solution to Moshe's upsetness, which isn't even any more clear than the original problems. Hashem says to him to take 70 elders and they're going to carry the burden with you. That seems like a reasonable solution to me, right? Except if you're us and you've read the rest of the Torah and we know what happens after this, Moshe has endless problems, the spies and Korach and Balaam and wars and sins and problems. And I've checked this up. These same 70 elders are never mentioned again in the rest of the Torah, meaning they're brought there to help Moshe carry this burden. But at no point does it ever tell us in the Torah that any such burden was shared with them. It doesn't ever say that the elders actually helped Moshe with any of his future problems. So if the whole scheme didn't work, why would Hashem suggest a solution that's not even a solution for the problem that Moshe is bringing up? So I'm banging my head against my Torah all Shabbat long, trying to figure out these conundrums. After a lot of thought, I feel like this portion is actually really speaking a very timely lesson to us in our particular generation and the challenges that we face. What is essentially going on here? Let's go back to the actual story. What's happening here for Israel that's different than their previous complaints? In their other complaints, they usually had an objective actual need, like they were legitimately hungry, or they were legitimately thirsty, or they were legitimately terrified. Could they have found a better way than complaining? Sure. Hindsight's 20/20. Maybe they should have just had faith. Maybe they should have prayed in a positive way, praised Hashem for all that he's given and said like, oh, you know, Hashem, could you also help us with that? Complaining isn't like really great, but nonetheless, we kind of feel for them. We have a heart for them because they were in a hard situation. And it's not so easy to think straight when you're hungry and thirsty, right? We don't make great decisions when we're, you know, in those types of hardships. And so maybe Moshe was a little bit upset, but in the end, Hashem provided for them that which they were complaining about. And the complaints were basically dealt with mercifully. Here, the situation is different. They have everything they need. They've left slavery. They've gotten the Torah. They've built their tabernacle. They have abundant water. And Hashem gives them a perfect portion of miraculous manna that falls for them every day in the exact amount that they need. They're not hungry. They're living in utopia. And what happens to them? They are bored. They say our souls are dry from this manna. They're not just hungry. It's like this emptiness. And who can understand this better than us in our generation? Like in the thousands of years since then, when people had to be struggling just to put anything on the table, could anyone actually relate with this story of having so much abundance that their biggest concern is lack of variety? That would have seemed insane, even just to our great-grandparents, right? Like you're bored from having all of your needs provided for you? Seriously? And yet in our generation, it's what we constantly are coping with, boredom. It's essentially what drives our entire modern culture. You need the newest car, the newest iPhone, the newest fashion, because the old car, the old phone, the old clothes, they're not broken or unusable, but our culture trains us to loathe boredom and always seek the newest, hottest, most advanced thing. And how many marriages fall apart from boredom? The same cultural ethos seeps into our most intimate relationships. You know, I'm a family lawyer, and people tell me they just get tired of the same old person, the same conversation. They need excitement. They need something new. They need variety. I know everything about you. I want somebody more interesting. And this constant search for variety essentially drives our culture. New equals good. And with kids, don't even get me started. The Israelites are like modern children because they have all their needs met. In the past, children had to be working in the homestead. Today, children have everything they need. Which parent doesn't go crazy hearing their kids saying, oh, I'm so bored. I'm so bored. For me, like when my kids say that, it's like nails on the chalkboard. I'm just like, really? You can't think of anything to do? I'm like looking at the laundry pile and the unmatched socks. Nothing to do is coming up in mind. But it's not really their fault. That's the culture we live in. Everything is so abundant, and so much less work is needed to create that abundance than what would have been needed in the past. And so it creates boredom. And the situation is not going to get any better. It's going to get worse, because with artificial intelligence, so many people are predicting that more and more things that we even do today will be done for us by AI, and we'll just be able to sit back and enjoy. But that enjoyment comes with boredom that's sure to follow, and the desire for more and more variety all the time. So the Torah is like speaking to us, to our generation. What is the Torah telling us through this story of Israel's boredom? Israel says, we're sick of this same old manna. We want something new. And there are two messages that we get here. First of all, what's interesting is what Hashem says. He teaches them something so deep. He doesn't say, no, you guys are wrong. He says, yes, but he gives it to them in excess. It says in verse 20, you shall eat it not 1 day, not 2 days, not 5 days, not 10 days, not 20 days, but for a full month, until it comes out of your nose and nauseates you. Because you have despised the Lord who was amongst you, and you've cried out before him, saying, why did we ever leave Egypt? Just this lesson alone is really valuable. What is Hashem saying? He's saying, I'm going to give you what you think you need, what you think will solve your problem. You think that you're bored and therefore you need variety. You need the newest food, the most titillating new experience, but it's not going to satisfy you. Here's the secret. I'm going to give you literally an endless amount of what you're asking for. And not only will you not be happy, it will actually come out of your nose and nauseate you, meaning that which you think is what you want most is actually going to disgust you. And then Hashem hints to us, what is the real problem? He says, you think your problem is lack of variety, some physical need that you want to, have the next best model of, and that you'll be happy, but no, it's because you despise the Lord who is among you and cried before him. Why did we ever leave Egypt? Meaning Hashem is hyperlinking us back to the real problem. There are two things that the Israelites said, if you look carefully. They asked for meat. Yeah, that's true. But that might not have been so bad alone. They said, they said, oh, Hashem, please give us a side dish. Fair enough. But look carefully what they said. Go back to verse 5. They said, we remember the fish that we ate in Egypt free of charge, the cucumbers, the watermelons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. Here we're at the crux of the problem. They're not hungry, but even with everything that they have, they're willing to go back to Egypt, of all places, to soothe their boredom. What does that mean? That they've gotten the Torah, they've built the tabernacle for the sole purpose of what? Of going to the land of Israel and creating a kingdom of Hashem, being a light unto the nations. Now remember, this is before the sin of the spies. It's not like they're facing a 40 years of boredom. They know or think or believe this is a temporary problem, and yet still, for that small period of lack of variety, that they're willing to give up the entire mission of Israel and go back to Egypt. They've lost the meaning, the purpose of their existence. It has nothing to do with the meat. Egypt, of all places, the center of the evil empire that is willing to enslave and kill just to keep the pyramid machine moving. And now you can understand why Moshe's response was so different. He has and will face crises and hardships, and he's okay with that. But his entire life's mission was to take them out of Egypt and bring them to the land. And after everything they've been through, they're willing to throw it away for a smorgasbord. That's like the side perk of being a slave in Egypt. There's literally no point to his entire life. Can you imagine the failure that Moshe feels right now? Rabbi Sachs explains it so beautifully. He says, they experienced the twin peaks of revelation at Mount Sinai. They constructed the tabernacle. They'd come closer to God than any nation ever before. And they weren't starving. Their complaint was not that they had no food. They had the manna, but their complaint was that it was boring. He says they reached the spiritual heights, but they remained the same small-minded people they had been before. And that is what made Moshe feel that his entire mission had failed and would continue to fail, because his mission was to help them create a society that would be the opposite of Egypt, that would liberate instead of oppress, that would dignify instead of enslave. But the people had not changed. Worse, they had taken refuge in the most absurd nostalgia for Egypt that they had left. Memories of fish and cucumbers and garlic. Moshe discovered it was easier to take the Israelites out of Egypt than to take Egypt out of the Israelites. So now, if we understand that that's the problem, we can also understand Hashem's solution. Because if Moshe was just saying, I can't take these annoying people anymore, it would have been reasonable for Hashem to give him some people to share the burden. But then why don't we ever see them sharing the burden in the rest of the Torah? Hashem wouldn't offer a ridiculous solution to a serious problem. But if we understand that Moshe's breakdown was not because he was tired of taking care of us, but it was a breakdown of meaning, saying, how am I supposed to give these people meaning if everything I've done hasn't given them a connection to their life's mission? Then maybe these 70 people are the right solution. Look carefully at who was chosen for these 70. Because remember, in Yitro, when Moshe was technically, physically exhausted from taking care of judging the people all day long, then they chose middle management, whose qualities were like integrity, leadership, honesty. They didn't need any kind of spiritual epiphany. They were like bureaucrats. But here, the main inauguration for these 70 leaders is prophecy, meaning what Hashem was looking for in these leaders was a spiritual quality, not to be good managers. And that's why we don't hear about them in the future crises and wars, because they weren't managers, they weren't bureaucrats, they weren't there to solve problems. The solution wasn't bureaucratic, but to be ongoing, day-to-day spiritual guides down on the ground with the nation. Moshe feels like a failure, but Hashem is essentially saying that even with all of the revelation that you brought them, the tabernacle that you built them, the exodus that you took them out of, that wears off. The only way to maintain a real connection with Hashem and the meaning of your life is constant upkeep of study and being strengthened by good teachers, spiritual role models. There's no sound and light show that's going to do the trick. One charismatic leader can't do it alone. You need to take some of your inspiration and create communities of study and growth. And how do I know that I'm right? Because it is true that these elders were never mentioned again in the Torah, but they are mentioned in the prophets twice. This almost identical verses appear in Joshua and Judges. In Joshua 24:31, and later in Judges, it says, and Israel served the Lord in the days of Joshua and all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua, who had known all the works of the Lord that he had done for Israel. Meaning it actually worked. Even without Moshe and without Joshua, the system of having teachers spread among the tribes who had spiritual experiences, real connection with Hashem, and who had seen what Hashem did for Israel and understood the mission of the Jewish people, he could share that with these communities. And that was the way, the only way to keep everyone plugged in and, and nursing from that spiritual source. So what is the Torah teaching us? That boredom is not fixed by variety, but rather by finding meaning. You can do the same job again and again if you are invigorated and inspired by the purpose. How many of us mothers know what it's like to do the same laundry and the same dishes every day? But if you're tapped into the purpose and the meaning of your life's mission, then you'll never get bored of that. And what is the secret to keeping that connection to the mission? The Torah is showing us it's to create study communities, spiritual communities, communities where we come together and we're reminding one another, strengthening one another, learning together. And there's no escape. There's no one great experience that can give that to us. It's only through the slow, Sisyphic, consistent, day-to-day work on ourselves in community together that can keep us plugged in and fend off that constant boredom that the Israelites faced in Egypt and that we as a modern society today have to cope with so much. So with that, I wish everybody an inspired, beautiful, and amazing week. Bye, guys.